Emily was only 8 years old, but she already carried a heart bigger than most adults. She lived with her mother in a quiet town where life was simple, but not always easy. Her mother worked long hours at a small bakery, and though money was often tight, she never let Emily feel the weight of their struggles. Every morning before leaving for school, her mother would prepare a small lunch for her, usually a sandwich, sometimes with a little fruit or a cookie tucked in. It wasn't much, but it was made with love, and Emily looked forward to it every day. On a cool afternoon in early autumn, Emily walked home from school, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She liked taking the longer way through the park, where trees lined the path and leaves crunched under her shoes. It made her walk feel like an adventure, even if she was only traveling between school and home. That day, as she stepped onto the park's main path, she noticed something unusual. Near the bench under a large oak tree, a big dog was lying down, its head resting on its paws. At first, Emily froze, unsure whether to be scared or curious. The dog was a German Shepherd, though Emily didn't know breeds well. What she saw was a creature with sad eyes, matted fur, and ribs faintly visible under his coat. He looked hungry and tired, as if the world had forgotten him. For a moment, their eyes met. Emily's small heart skipped. The dog didn't growl or bark. Instead, he simply watched her quietly, as if waiting for something. Children her age might have run away, but Emily felt something else. She felt sorry for him. Slowly, she opened her backpack and pulled out her sandwich. It was simple: 2 slices of bread with peanut butter and jelly. She had been excited to eat it, but as she looked at the dog, she thought about how hungry he must be. Her mother always told her that kindness was never wasted, and at that moment, Emily decided that this dog needed it more than she did. She took a few cautious steps forward. The dog lifted his head, his ears twitching. Emily stopped when she was close enough, crouched down, and held the sandwich out with her small hands. "Here," she whispered softly, her voice shaking just a little. "You can have it." The German Shepherd hesitated, his nose sniffing the air. For a second, Emily thought he might not come closer. Then, slowly, carefully, he pushed himself up and padded toward her. His paws were large, his body strong, even though he looked weak. Emily didn't move. She just held the sandwich steady. The dog sniffed her hand, his wet nose tickling her fingers, and then, with one gentle bite, he took the sandwich. He ate it quickly, but not roughly, almost as though he understood that it had been given with care. Emily smiled, her fear melting away. She reached out her hand, and to her surprise, the dog didn't back away. Instead, he allowed her to touch his head. His fur was rough and tangled, but to Emily, it felt wonderful. She stroked him gently, speaking in a quiet voice. "You're a good boy. You must be so hungry." For a moment, the world around her faded. The sound of children playing in the distance, the wind rustling through the trees. All of it seemed softer as she and the dog shared that quiet connection. His eyes, once sad, now seemed a little brighter, as though her kindness had lit a small spark inside him. Emily stayed with him for a while, talking to him as if he could understand every word. She told him about her day at school, about how she had learned new words in class, and about how her mother always packed her favorite jelly. The dog listened in silence, tilting his head slightly, his eyes following her every move. It felt to Emily as if he truly did understand, or at least that he cared enough to stay. After some time, Emily knew she had to go home. Her mother would worry if she was late. She stood up and patted the dog's head one last time. "I have to go now," she said softly, "but maybe I'll see you tomorrow." The dog didn't follow her. He simply sat by the bench again, his tail giving a small wag as she walked away. That night at dinner, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the dog. She told her mother about him, how he looked lonely and hungry, and how she had given him her sandwich. Her mother listened carefully, her eyes warm but cautious. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "I'm glad you were kind. But stray dogs can sometimes be dangerous. You must be careful." Emily nodded, but deep down she didn't feel afraid. There had been something in the dog's eyes, something gentle, that made her believe he was different. The next day, Emily packed her school things with more excitement than usual. She hoped she would see the dog again. Her mother noticed her mood and asked what had her smiling, but Emily only shrugged, not wanting to explain too much. She wanted it to be her little secret, at least for now. After school, Emily rushed through the park. Her heart raced as she neared the bench under the oak tree. And there he was, the German Shepherd. He was sitting upright this time, his ears perked, as if he had been waiting for her. When he saw her, his tail thumped against the ground. Emily's face lit up with joy. She ran toward him, her small steps quick and eager. She didn't have a sandwich that day, only half an apple and a cookie. Still, she pulled them out and offered them to him. He took the apple first, crunching it happily, and then accepted the cookie gently from her hand. Emily laughed softly. "You like sweets too, huh?" she said, giggling at the sight. She stroked his fur again, noticing how he leaned into her touch just a little more this time. Emily stayed longer that afternoon, sitting on the grass beside him. Other children passed by, some pointing and whispering about the big dog, but Emily didn't care. To her, he wasn't scary. He was a friend. She decided to call him Shadow, because he had appeared out of nowhere and now seemed to stay close to her like a shadow. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Emily finally got up to leave. Shadow stood too, following her a few steps before stopping at the edge of the park. It was almost as if he knew where her home began and respected that space. Emily turned back, waving her little hand. "Goodbye, Shadow. I'll see you tomorrow." Shadow gave a low wag of his tail and sat down, watching her until she was out of sight. That night, Emily could hardly sleep. Her mind was filled with images of the dog, his sad eyes, his wagging tail, the way he seemed to listen to her stories. She felt something special growing between them, though she couldn't explain it. It was as though fate had placed Shadow in her path, and now their lives were tied together by something bigger than either of them understood. And though Emily did not know it yet, that simple act of sharing her sandwich was only the beginning. Something unexpected was about to happen, something that would change both her life and the life of the stray German shepherd forever. The week passed quickly, and Emily's bond with Shadow grew stronger every day. She had begun to plan her school lunches with him in mind, asking her mother to pack a little extra whenever she could. Sometimes her mother would sigh, wondering why her daughter suddenly cared so much about sharing food. But she still added an extra slice of bread or a cookie without asking too many questions. Deep down, she knew Emily's heart was soft and giving, and she didn't want to dim that light. Shadow had become part of Emily's world in a way she could no longer imagine living without. Every afternoon, his big body and wagging tail were waiting near the oak tree. Sometimes he followed her halfway home. Sometimes he only stayed near the park. Either way, he was always there, as if he knew exactly when school would end and where Emily would appear. She felt safe knowing he was around, though she still hadn't told her mother the full story. To her, Shadow was a secret gift, something precious that she wanted to protect. One Friday evening, Emily and her mother went shopping at the small town market. The sun had already dipped behind the hills and the streets were growing dim. Emily carried a small bag of apples, trying her best to keep up with her mother, who walked briskly with heavier bags. As they turned onto their street, Emily suddenly noticed two men standing near the corner. They were leaning against a wall, speaking in low voices. Something about them made Emily uneasy. Their eyes followed her and her mother as they walked closer. Emily's mother felt it too. She gripped her daughter's hand tighter and whispered, "Stay close to me." The men didn't say anything, but their stares were sharp, their bodies shifting slightly as if preparing to move. Emily's heart began to pound. She wished they could walk faster, but the bags were heavy, and her mother was tired from the long day. Just then, a deep growl filled the air. It came from behind them, low and powerful, carrying a warning that froze everyone in place. Emily turned and saw him, Shadow. He had appeared from the shadows of the alley, his ears pinned back, his teeth slightly bared, his eyes glowing with protective fire. He stepped forward, his body tall and strong, the rain from earlier still clinging to his fur. The two men shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered something under his breath, and the other gave a nervous laugh. They took a step back, then another, their confidence breaking under the gaze of the German shepherd. Shadow let out another growl, louder this time, and the men quickly disappeared down the street. Glancing over their shoulders as they fled, Emily stood frozen, her small hand still clutching her mother's. Her mother stared wide-eyed at the dog, her breath unsteady. For a moment, no one moved. Then Shadow trotted forward, his tail wagging slowly as he approached Emily. He sniffed her hand, nudging it softly as if to ask, "Are you all right?" Tears filled Emily's eyes, but they weren't from fear. She bent down and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Thank you, Shadow," she whispered, her voice trembling. You saved us." Her mother knelt too, setting down the bags, and for the first time she didn't look at the dog with worry. Instead, she looked at him with gratitude. She had just seen with her own eyes that he was no ordinary stray. He had protected them when they needed it most. From that night onward, things changed. Shadow no longer stayed only at the park. He began walking them home regularly, keeping a few steps behind as if guarding their path. Neighbors started noticing the large German shepherd following the little girl and her mother. Some whispered in concern, but others nodded with respect, realizing that the dog wasn't wild or dangerous, he was loyal. Emily's mother still had doubts. Taking care of a dog wasn't easy, and money was already tight. But she couldn't deny the bond she saw between her daughter and Shadow. Every time Emily hugged him, her eyes lit up in a way that warmed her mother's heart. She also couldn't forget the way Shadow had stood against those men. Something about him felt almost destined, as though he had appeared in their lives for a reason. One afternoon, Emily sat in the park with Shadow resting beside her. She leaned her head against his side, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You're my hero," she whispered. "I don't know how you knew we were in trouble, but you came at the right time. You'll always take care of us, won't you?" Shadow gave a small huff, his tail thumping against the grass. Emily smiled, taking it as his answer. Over the next few days, their bond only deepened. Emily began brushing his fur with an old hairbrush she found at home. She tied ribbons around his scarf to make him look less like a stray. Sometimes she even read her school books aloud to him, giggling when he tilted his head as if trying to understand. Other children began to notice too, and some of them grew curious. "Is that your dog?" a boy asked one afternoon as Emily sat with Shadow. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, his name is Shadow." The boy shrugged, impressed, and walked away. For the first time, Emily felt proud. She didn't care that Shadow wasn't bought from a store or given as a gift. He had chosen her, and that meant more than anything else. But even with all the joy, Emily knew there was still a problem. Shadow had no home. Every night when she and her mother went inside, he stayed outside, curling up under the bench or by the corner of the building. Emily would peek out her window sometimes and see him lying there, his eyes half open, watching the street. She wanted desperately to bring him inside, to give him a warm bed, but she knew her mother wasn't ready for that step. Still, things were shifting. Her mother had begun leaving scraps from dinner outside in a small bowl. It wasn't much, but it was a sign that she was starting to accept him. Emily noticed and smiled silently, knowing her mother's heart was softening. One chilly evening, Emily walked home from school later than usual. The street lamps were just beginning to glow, and the air carried a hint of winter. She shivered in her thin jacket. As she neared her apartment, she spotted Shadow waiting for her at the corner. The next morning, Emily woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight was still soft through her small bedroom window, but she was already wide awake thinking about Shadow. She had never felt so excited to go to school before. She quickly dressed, brushed her hair, and rushed to the kitchen where her mother was packing her lunch. Her mother noticed the unusual brightness in her daughter's eyes and smiled. "You seem very cheerful today," she said as she spread peanut butter on a slice of bread. Emily grinned but didn't say much. She didn't want her mother to worry too much about the stray dog. She just hoped Shadow would be waiting for her after school, just like yesterday. She tucked her lunchbox carefully into her bag, making sure she could take something out for him later. At school, Emily struggled to pay attention. Her teacher spoke about numbers and stories, but Emily's mind kept drifting back to the park bench. She imagined Shadow sitting there, ears alert, eyes scanning the path for her. She doodled little pictures of a dog in her notebook, smiling every time she thought about his wagging tail. Her classmates didn't notice. Emily was a quiet girl who usually kept to herself, but inside her heart, she felt like she had found something very special. Finally, the school bell rang and Emily almost ran out of the classroom. She clutched her backpack straps and hurried down the familiar path, her shoes tapping against the sidewalk. The moment she stepped into the park, her eyes searched for the big oak tree. Her heart leapt when she saw him. Shadow was there. He was sitting upright, his head turning the moment he spotted her. His tail began to thump on the ground. Emily's face lit up and she rushed over. "Shadow," she whispered happily, though no one had given him that name but her. To her surprise, he stood up and walked a few steps toward her, closing the distance. He seemed more confident today, as though he recognized her now and trusted her. She pulled out her lunchbox, opening it with eager hands. Inside was the sandwich her mother had made, along with a small banana. Emily hesitated. She was hungry too, but when she saw the way Shadow's eyes followed her sandwich, she knew what she wanted to do. She broke the sandwich into 2 halves, offering one to Shadow. "Here, you can have this. I'll save the other half for me," she said softly. The German Shepherd carefully took the sandwich from her hand, eating it quickly but gently, just as he had the day before. Emily sat on the grass beside him, peeling her banana and sharing little pieces with him between bites of her own. She giggled when his nose brushed her palm and she stroked his head as he ate. As they sat together, some people in the park began to notice the little girl with the big stray dog. A couple of mothers whispered to each other, concerned that such a large animal was so close to a child. One man walking his small dog frowned, pulling his pet closer. But Emily didn't hear their whispers or see their frowns. To her, Shadow wasn't dangerous. He was gentle and calm, like a guardian who had been waiting for her. After eating, Shadow stretched out on the grass beside Emily, resting his head on his paws. She leaned against his warm fur, feeling comfort she had never known before. "You're my best friend now," she whispered. "I wish I could take you home, but Mama would say we don't have space." The dog gave a small huff as if he understood. Emily sighed and told him about her day, about her spelling test and how she hoped she had done well. Shadow listened quietly, his eyes half closed but his ears twitching whenever she spoke. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. Every afternoon, Shadow was waiting for her in the park, and every time Emily would share part of her lunch. Sometimes it was a sandwich, sometimes fruit, sometimes just a cookie. But no matter how small, she always gave him something. In return, Shadow followed her part of the way home, stopping just before the corner where her apartment building came into view. He never crossed that invisible line, as though he understood he wasn't yet allowed into her world completely. One rainy afternoon, Emily worried that he wouldn't be there. She walked faster through the drizzle, her umbrella bouncing against her shoulder. But when she reached the oak tree, there he was, soaked, shivering, but still waiting. Her heart ached as she rushed over to him. "Oh, Shadow," she said, wrapping her little arms around his wet fur. "You stayed here in the rain?" She pulled out the piece of bread her mother had packed and gave it to him, even though it was getting soggy from the rain. Shadow ate it quickly, his eyes warm as he looked at her. Emily didn't care that her clothes were damp now from hugging him. All she cared about was that he was there, and that he had waited for her even in the storm. Back at home, Emily's mother began to notice how her daughter seemed happier these days. Emily talked more at dinner, her cheeks glowing as she told little stories about her friend in the park. Though her mother didn't know all the details, she guessed it had something to do with the stray dog. She was worried, of course. Stray dogs could carry problems and they didn't have the money to care for one. But she couldn't deny the joy she saw in Emily's eyes whenever she spoke of him. One evening, as Emily and her mother walked home from the market carrying heavy bags, Shadow appeared again. This time he didn't stay in the park. He followed them quietly, keeping a few steps behind. Emily turned and smiled. "See, Mama, he likes us." Her mother frowned but said nothing. Part of her was unsettled, but another part felt strangely safer with the big dog walking nearby. The next day, Emily tried something new. She brought an old scarf from home, one she no longer used, and wrapped it around Shadow's neck like a collar. "There," she said proudly. "Now you look like you belong to someone." Shadow wagged his tail, looking almost regal with the scarf hanging loosely. Emily clapped her hands and laughed. For the first time, she imagined what life would be like if he truly belonged to her. Little by little, Shadow became part of Emily's routine. He wasn't just a stray dog in the park anymore. He was her companion, her listener, her silent protector. Other children at school began to notice too. Some of them teased her, saying it was strange to have a dirty street dog as a friend. But Emily didn't care. She knew Shadow was more than that. She had seen kindness in his eyes, loyalty in the way he waited for her every day, and strength in the way he walked beside her. What Emily didn't realize was that Shadow had already started watching over her in ways she couldn't see. He didn't just wait for her in the afternoons. Sometimes at night he lingered near her building, lying down in the shadows, his ears alert to every sound. He had chosen her, and in his silent way he had decided that he would protect her no matter what. And soon, much sooner than Emily or her mother could imagine, that loyalty would be tested. The little girl who had once given up her sandwich to feed a starving stray was about to discover that her small act of kindness had awakened a protector who would change her life forever. The next morning, Emily woke up with an unusual excitement in her heart. She had hardly slept because the memory of the night before kept replaying in her head. She could not stop thinking about the way Shadow had stepped in front of her and her mother when those two strange men had appeared near their building. She could still hear the deep growl in his throat, a sound that had scared the men away within seconds. Emily had felt a strange mix of fear and comfort in that moment. Fear because the night had been dark and uncertain, but comfort because Shadow had been there like a guard sent only for her. When she came to breakfast, her mother was quiet. She sliced bread slowly, her mind far away. Emily sat down, wondering if her mother would talk about what had happened. Finally, her mother sighed and looked at her. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "about last night. I still don't know how to feel about that dog, but I can't deny he protected us." Emily's face brightened immediately. "See, Mama? I told you he's good. He's not just a stray. He's special. He saved us." Her mother didn't reply right away, but the thoughtful look in her eyes gave Emily hope. Something had shifted. The dog her mother once saw as a danger was now being seen differently. Later that afternoon, Emily raced out of school and into the park. As always, Shadow was waiting near the oak tree. But today he didn't just sit and wait. When he saw her, he ran forward a few steps, his tail wagging hard. Emily knelt and hugged him tightly, whispering into his ear, "Mama knows now. She knows you're good." That evening, something unusual happened. For the first time, Shadow followed Emily all the way to her building, without stopping at his usual invisible line. He climbed the steps behind her and sat right at the door. Emily's mother came out carrying groceries, and her eyes widened when she saw the large German shepherd sitting there like he belonged. The neighbors were already whispering, some watching from their balconies, others slowing their steps as they passed by. "Is that your dog now?" one woman asked curiously. Emily's mother hesitated. She didn't know how to answer. Before she could speak, Emily declared proudly, "Yes, his name is Shadow." The words came out so confidently that her mother didn't have the heart to correct her. She only sighed and carried the groceries inside. From that evening onward, Shadow seemed to take his new role seriously. He no longer stayed in the park. Instead, he positioned himself near the building's entrance, lying down with his head resting on his paws, watching everyone who came and went. The neighbors were unsure at first. Some were afraid, some complained quietly, but after a few days they began to notice something. Delivery workers who often acted rude were suddenly polite. Teenagers who usually made noise outside the building stayed quieter when they saw Shadow's watchful eyes. And no strangers lingered near the entrance anymore. One night, Emily's mother stepped out to take the trash to the bins. As she walked down the narrow alley beside the building, a figure came out of the shadows. A man, rough-looking, started moving toward her. Before she could even cry out, a sharp bark exploded through the night. Shadow had followed her, his fur standing tall, his teeth bared, and his bark so loud that the man froze in place before turning and running off. Emily's mother stood still, her heart racing. Shadow came to her side, walking calmly now, as if nothing unusual had happened. She looked down at him, her fear melting into gratitude. "Maybe you really are meant to be here," she whispered. Word spread quickly in the neighborhood. The stray dog who had once been ignored was now being spoken of as a guardian. Some children began calling him the soldier dog, while older neighbors said he must have been trained in the past. Nobody knew his story, but everyone began to respect his presence. Emily was overjoyed. Every day she spent more time with Shadow, brushing his fur with an old comb she found, giving him scraps of food, and talking to him like he was her closest friend. He followed her everywhere, down the street, to the market, and back to the park. He never left her side. At school, Emily even began to draw pictures of him, showing her classmates how brave and loyal he was. But her happiness wasn't without challenges. Some neighbors complained to the landlord, saying a big dog didn't belong in their building area. One man warned that he would call animal control. When Emily heard this, she ran to Shadow and hugged him tightly, tears filling her eyes. "No one will take you away," she whispered. "I won't let them." Her mother saw her daughter's tears and felt a deep ache in her heart. She realized that Shadow wasn't just a stray dog anymore. He had become family. And though they didn't have much, they could find a way to keep him safe. The next day, her mother bought a cheap but sturdy collar from the market. When she came home, she placed it around Shadow's neck. Emily's eyes sparkled with joy. "Now he really belongs with us," she said proudly. That small act changed everything. With a collar, Shadow was no longer seen as just a stray. People began treating him differently, with less fear and more acceptance. The landlord, seeing how protective he was, decided to stay quiet about the complaints. And slowly, the neighbors began to feel safer with him around. As weeks passed, Shadow's bond with Emily grew stronger. At night, he slept just outside their door, never moving unless he heard a noise. In the mornings, he walked with Emily to school, waiting patiently outside until she came back. Sometimes the children from her class would stop and pet him, though most were still nervous around such a large dog. Emily felt proud, though. To her, Shadow wasn't just a pet. He was her hero, her silent guardian. One particular evening when the sun was setting and the streets were quiet, Emily and her mother went for a short walk. Shadow padded along beside them. Suddenly, a car pulled up nearby and a man stepped out, looking around suspiciously. He began moving toward them, his hand in his pocket. Shadow immediately positioned himself in front of Emily and her mother, his body stiff, his eyes locked on the stranger. The man stopped in his tracks, hesitated, then quickly got back into his car and drove off. Emily clung to Shadow, her small fingers gripping his fur. "You saved us again," she whispered. Her mother's voice trembled as she said, "Yes, he really is our guardian now." From that night forward, there was no more doubt. Shadow wasn't just a visitor or a stray who came for food. He was part of their family. Emily's mother began setting aside leftovers for him every evening, and sometimes even small portions from their meals. Neighbors who once complained now greeted him kindly. A few even left scraps of food by the building, calling him the protector of their street. Emily's days were now filled with laughter and joy. She no longer felt afraid when she walked home late, because she knew Shadow was always watching. Her mother, though still cautious, felt more secure too. Their small apartment, once just a place to live, now felt like a safe home, guarded by loyalty and love. And though none of them knew it yet, Shadow's story with Emily was far from over. His devotion, born from a single sandwich given by a kind little girl, was about to bring even greater changes to their lives. The bond between a child and her dog had grown into something powerful, something that touched not only their family but the whole neighborhood around them. Winter was slowly approaching. The air had turned crisp, and leaves covered the streets in shades of gold and brown. Emily wore her little coat and scarf every day, while Shadow's thick fur helped him stay warm. He had grown healthier in the past weeks. His ribs were no longer showing, his coat had become shinier, and his eyes were bright with life. Every time Emily looked at him, her heart filled with pride. To her, he was no longer a stray. He was Shadow, her best friend, her guardian, and a part of her family. Emily's mother had grown to accept him fully. At first she had been cautious, but after all the times he had protected them, she could not imagine life without him. She began to smile whenever she saw Shadow waiting by their door. Sometimes, after long days at the bakery, she would kneel and pat his head, whispering, "Thank you for watching over us." Shadow would close his eyes and wag his tail, as if he understood every word. The neighbors, too, had changed their views. Where they once frowned at his presence, now they spoke proudly about him. "That German Shepherd is like a guard for the whole street," one man said. "Since he's been around, no troublemakers dare to hang around here." Another woman added, "He must have been trained. You can see it in the way he moves." Nobody knew where Shadow had come from or what his past was, but everyone agreed on one thing. He belonged here now. One evening, something special happened. Emily and her mother returned home to find a small box on their doorstep. Inside was a dog blanket, a stainless steel food bowl, and a note that read, "For Shadow, the hero of our street." It was from the neighbors. Emily clapped her hands in joy. "Look, Mama, they love him too." That night she laid the blanket outside their door and Shadow curled up on it, his eyes half closed in peace. For the first time in his life, he wasn't lying on cold ground. He had warmth, comfort, and love. Life began to feel brighter for Emily. She was no longer the quiet girl at school who kept to herself. Now she often told stories about Shadow. Some of her classmates were curious, and a few even came by after school just to see him. They would stand at a safe distance at first, but when they saw how gentle he was with Emily, They grew braver and reached out to pet him. Shadow accepted them calmly, his tail wagging as Emily beamed with pride. One Saturday, Emily decided to teach Shadow a little trick. She held out a piece of bread and said, "Sit." To her surprise, he sat down immediately, as though he already knew the command. She laughed in delight and tried another. "Shake!" Shadow lifted his paw, placing it gently in her hand. Emily's eyes widened. "Mama, did you see that? He knows tricks." Her mother nodded, amazed. It became clear that Shadow must have had an owner before, someone who had trained him. But for whatever reason, he had ended up on the streets. Though his past remained a mystery, Emily didn't care. All that mattered was that he was here now. He was hers, and he seemed to know it too. Wherever she went, he followed. If she sat in the park, he lay beside her. If she walked to school, he escorted her halfway. At night, he never left their doorstep. Then came a day that tested everything. Emily was walking home from school when a car suddenly sped around the corner too fast. She froze in fear, her little feet unable to move as the car drew closer. In that instant, Shadow leapt forward, pushing her out of the way with his strong body. Emily fell onto the grass, her knees scraped, but she was safe. The car swerved and honked angrily before speeding away. Shadow barked loudly, his eyes sharp, his body tense until the danger passed. Emily sat up, tears in her eyes, and threw her arms around him. "You saved me again," she whispered, her voice shaking. People nearby rushed over, some scolding the reckless driver even though he was long gone. Others looked at Shadow with awe. One man said, "That dog is more than a pet. He's a guardian angel." When Emily's mother heard about it, she cried and hugged her daughter tightly. Then she turned to Shadow, kneeling down to stroke his fur. "I don't know what we would do without you," she said softly. From that day on, she stopped calling him just a dog. She called him family. Shadow's story spread beyond the neighborhood. One of the bakery's regular customers heard about him and wrote a small piece in the local newspaper titled, "The German Shepherd Who Guards a Little Girl." The article included a picture of Emily hugging Shadow, her small arms wrapped around his neck. When Emily saw it in print, she giggled and said, "Shadow, you're famous now." He only wagged his tail, happy just to be by her side. Despite the attention, Shadow never changed. He remained the same gentle, loyal dog who only cared about protecting Emily and her mother. At night, when the streets were quiet, Emily would sometimes sit by the window and look down. She would see Shadow curled up on his blanket, his ears twitching at every sound, his body always ready. She felt safe knowing he was there. One winter evening, as snowflakes began to fall, Emily's mother finally opened the door and said, "Come inside, Shadow." It was the first time she had ever invited him into their home. Emily squealed with joy as Shadow stepped carefully onto the warm floor. She guided him to a corner where they placed an old rug just for him. Shadow lay down, his eyes shining with gratitude. Emily curled up beside him, stroking his fur. "Now you're really part of us," she whispered. That night, as the snow fell gently outside, Emily, her mother, and Shadow shared their small, warm home together. It wasn't much, but it was filled with love, and that love had all started from one simple act. A little girl sharing her sandwich with a hungry stray dog. The unexpected had truly happened. What began as kindness on an ordinary afternoon had turned into a bond that would last a lifetime. Emily had given Shadow food, but in return he had given her something greater: loyalty, safety, and love beyond measure. From that day forward, no one called him a stray again. He was Shadow, the protector, the friend, the family member who had found his place, and Emily knew deep in her heart that she and Shadow would never be apart again.